Oh shit. I gotta put up a new video. Oh, I know. I'll make up something with a theme. Left tube, here we go. Well, don't just stand there, put up a title screen or something. Part 0. I like the good old games. Well, there's no getting around it. I've been feeling pretty uninspired lately. Look, when I started this YouTube channel, I figured I'd do something kind of like Mandalore Gaming or LGR or G-Man Lives and just talk about the kind of games that I'm into. Just turn an otherwise unproductive habit into a creative one. That way I could sort of munch away on my nostalgia like a bunch of filthy cookies. It's disgusting. Give me some of those cookies. Give me some of those cookies. Because nostalgia is the through line in a lot of these videos. None of the games I've talked about are both recent and original. So yeah, it's no secret that I wax nostalgic about older games. You see, to me, the golden age of video games was the mid-90s to early 2000s. Because of reasons. Because I was a child. There's this game and that game. Here's some cover art that looks great. Here's the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. Look how it redefined something. Polygons? Cinematics? Gameplay? Oh, right. Story. Action. Interaction. Narrative. Before this, games were something else. Now they've changed. Here's a video game book I haven't actually read, and a dictionary definition for something. Here's a citation. That's the only one you'll be getting. What, you think I do any research before I upload these videos? I'm not in university anymore, you can't make me read. Oh, and don't forget PC games and all their depth and complexity. If there's something I love, it's installing drivers, reformatting my PC when it suddenly won't boot, and messing around with graphical settings. Yep, us PC gamers have it way better than those console players, and they're awful, accessible games. Yeah. I know why people on YouTube do this exact thing. It's just easier to talk about a game when you already have a relationship with it. That way you don't have to engage with it on its own terms. It becomes about what the experience meant to you. All of the feelings and thoughts that you can pour into it. It serves to validate your sense of self, and yet it isn't always inspiring. It can be hard to find novelty there. It can easily become a hole you can climb into when life becomes complicated or uncomfortable. After all, games don't ask you to do your taxes, or challenge you to define your values or to stand up for yourself when your boundaries have been crossed. Part 1. Growing Up. I may not have any strict scientific evidence to back this up, but I think a lot of people have this nostalgic feeling ingrained in them. Just take a look at what sells most in video games. It's remakes or remasters of games from the early 90s to late 90s or 2000s to late 2000s. It's sequels to series that were popular around that time. So many people just want to go back and re-experience something because they feel that they miss it. And content creators make entire reviews, essays, or think pieces about this. I know that a lot of the YouTubers whose content I enjoy center a lot around a nostalgic longing for a time before everything changed in video games. The implication of everything has changed being that games were somehow better back then. And so watching that content is kind of like getting a fix of the good old days. But what has really changed since then? For the most part, it wasn't the games. At least they generally didn't change for the worse. It was us. We changed. We went to school and graduated. We got jobs and responsibilities and relationships to manage. We got challenged in ways that video games never really challenged us. And it's not always a fun transition. See, sometimes it can leave us feeling vulnerable and insecure. It can have us longing for a time when things were simpler. A time without those responsibilities. when you could spend a whole day piling up empty Coke cans in the corner, playing GTA Vice City, and crashing on sugar. That time has passed, and ideally, you want more for yourself. You want to grow and change for your own sake, instead of stagnating and falling into a pile on the floor. You gotta figure out what's right for you and how you can achieve a healthy balance in life. That's the work of growing. It can be scary as hell sometimes, but growing is good for you, because after you've suffered through those uncomfortable experiences enough times, you get to look back and go, hey, that problem I used to have in this particular area of my life isn't so big and terrifying anymore. And I don't think I was ever sure I'd get to feel this strong and capable. Part 2. Nostalgia. And yet, I haven't completely lost my interest in video games, especially older games I've played before, or their sequels or remakes. I would describe it as if I'm drawing water from a well of nostalgia. It's as though they represent a time in my life that I haven't fully processed, a time when I wasn't free to express myself. So they helped me cope when I wasn't feeling emotionally fulfilled. To me, it's video games, but to other people, it could be something else. You might have a similarly nostalgic relationship when it comes to music or TV shows or really anything else. No one is completely immune to nostalgia. It's just that gamers are such easy marks for this, because a lot of us didn't feel like we were normal or accepted or fit in. I grew up in a time where most people's understanding of video games were pretty limited. To the majority of the few people who actually played video games, there were the big three: Counter-Strike, Dota, and WoW. And that was it. If you didn't fit into those three, you were pretty much screwed. But so then I find myself asking myself, why did I gravitate towards certain types of video games outside of the norm? I could just as well have played
the big three,
or have gravitated towards other hobbies entirely. So there has to be something there that is a source of inspiration for me. After all, I wasn't going to make a YouTube channel about food or clothes or music. I don't really have much to say about any of those things. So there's a tension there. On the one hand, you can't drink too deeply from the well because you'll end up dissociating from yourself and from other people. But you can't quite leave behind this thing that you're drawn to either, because it still matters to you. You still find something about it inspiring. You still connect with it in some meaningful way. So, how do you square that tension? How do you integrate this hobby that is so closely related to a feeling of nostalgia so that your relationship with it enriches you instead of pulling you away from achieving a healthy balance in life? Part 3. The truth. The answer is simple yet hard to absorb at first. You work on your traumas. Don't think you got any? Wrong. Everybody's got traumas. Everybody has in some way internalized a lesson about what is and isn't safe to do, which runs contrary to their true nature. Who you can show yourself to be to others, and which behaviors will keep you safe. And that is the stuff you gotta work on. I'm not qualified to go into how you can improve yourself or work on your limitations. I'm not a licensed medical professional or a therapist or a psychologist. But even as a layman who's working on his own stuff, I can confidently say that almost everyone has suffered from some sort of trauma. Usually in childhood, when the human brain is still developing. It can be anything from your parents not mirroring your emotions properly, to being bullied by friends or family or people at school, to very traumatizing stuff like physical or psychological abuse. Everything leaves an imprint. Even if it might appear to yourself or someone else as this small surface level thing, everything becomes part of your internalized story about who you are, cementing your understanding of yourself. And because of how you interpreted what happened to you, through no real fault of your own, you ended up developing certain mechanisms to protect yourself. One such mechanism could be coping, not just with video games or some other form of entertainment, but really with this warm blanket feeling of nostalgia, of longing for a prior time, this ability to go back into a safe space. And that can be useful sometimes when you experience it in a proper dosage, but it can also be unhealthy. I played some Final Fantasy VII Remake earlier this year, but only got about 8 hours into it before I switched to a different game entirely. That was in favor of something I could more easily play through and do a video about. I don't know, it's a game that's over 30 hours long, and it was kind of hard to go through that much footage. But recently I picked it up again, and I noticed a stark difference in how I felt between each playthrough. This time around, I wasn't really captivated by it. Here's a little something to put my connection with Final Fantasy VII into perspective. It must have been back in '98 when I first played it. I was just a child then. I remember quite vividly being blown away by the music, the visuals, the character design, and the story. It just really got to me in a way. It was grand and bombastic and full of spectacle. There was this wide array of emotions, both joyful and sad. It was really easily digestible for me because the main character, Cloud, was this soldier with a big cool sword who was really strong and capable the way any little boy would want to be. And yet on the inside, he suppressed these complex, painful emotions of his past, which alienate him from himself and others. He only becomes capable of remembering and expressing himself. He only becomes capable of remembering and expressing himself as he forms connections with the characters around him. Aerith, Tifa, and Barret are much more emotive than Cloud, and over the course of the game end up bringing more emotions out in him. He smiles, laughs, shouts, and cries, and eventually learns to come to terms with his authentic self, confronting his inner traumas. He starts off rebelling against authority in order to prove that he doesn't need anyone, but later on learns how to serve others and how to express vulnerability. It's actually quite a beautiful transformation that takes place over the course of a 30-hour experience. And the music is really what carries the whole experience, as there is no voice acting and only very limited animations. And everyone looks like they're in a 3D Popeye the Sailor Man cartoon. Looks a little ridiculous in a way, but that's PlayStation 1 graphics for you. This other game here, Final Fantasy VIII, that came out like a year or two later, actually looked way better. Like the character models look way better. Animations, everything looks way better. Same platform, but like, you know, technology moves fast and all. I'll try playing some of the music over this footage, but I can't guarantee that there won't be some YouTube claim shenanigans that'll mess it up somehow. So with that in place, when I first tried Final Fantasy VII Remake, I did choke up at first. The brilliant score had been updated from a MIDI soundtrack to a full orchestra. The visuals had gone from simple polygons to fully realized 3D characters, even if the skyboxes look a bit janky, honestly. Everyone is fully voice acted now, and it just is an amazingly well-realized experience.
Just bear with him for me, would you?
Yeah.
And so for a few glorious hours, I had come home. I was back there. And then after the pace had died down and the nostalgia had started to wear off, I put it away for a little while. When I came back in late November, I was very much still impressed with it, but I wasn't as captivated anymore. And I think the reason why is that a few things have changed in my life. I've become a little bit more conscious of some of my patterns and how gaming and certain aspects of nostalgia fit into that. And this has made me less keen on going back just for the sake of nostalgia. Now I'm thinking that it's more interesting to dip my toe in for the sake of understanding. What is it that makes this work for me? How do I consciously connect with a similar source of inspiration in other areas of my life? I don't have an answer for that right now, but I don't think that I'm coping or self-medicating the way that I used to. I haven't actually completed Final Fantasy VII Remake yet, but already at the 12-hour mark, it's obvious to me that a lot of the tension between nostalgia and being present in the moment are also present in this game. It's not just a beat-for-beat remake of the original, rather it's like a retelling, almost as though these events have happened before. Events and bits of dialogue have been changed, either for the sake of improving the story or to create sort of meta-references to the original game. All this hints at something sinister happening in the background. And it's interesting that this alteration has gotten a lot of fans really upset. They don't like the idea of someone messing with the purity of the original game. They don't want anything to change other than wallpapering over a few mistakes here and there and updating some visuals and maybe a few aspects of the gameplay, just to make the game so that they can revisit their memory without having to feel like anything changed. And almost as though intending to pour salt into that wound, Square Enix is now set to release another remake for iOS and Android. This one is going to be free to play, with microtransactions, something that fans of the original game are very upset about, myself included. And so playing this game and trying to come up with motivation for a new video has got me thinking, you really can't go back. You can stare at the metaphorical picture of who you used to be and what you used to connect with. You can reminisce about those old experiences that you used to have. You can go for a deep dive and actually have a good time doing so. But no power in the world will ever give you back that feeling you long for, because it never existed to begin with. It was a misremembered, glorified idea of your past. A minuscule event that only seemed massive when viewed through a microscope. It was nothing but a polished snow globe that looked great from the inside, but could only be viewed from so many angles before your interest was eventually lost. And so on you go to a different memory, a different snow globe, trying to find that meaning. And yet, it's still worthwhile remembering what drew you to that experience in the first place, to catalog what it meant to you, who you were then and who you are now and looking back at it. Just don't drink exclusively from that well, because it won't nourish you. Alright, I think we came full circle. You can put the credits up now. Thanks for watching this video. If you found it interesting, go ahead and leave a comment, a like. I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about this. And as always, go ahead and click subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications when I post a new video. I originally started off wanting to do a shorter video, but I just didn't really feel inspired to do that, so I figured in the meantime I'd write down some thoughts that I had and make a video about that. I might pick up that previous idea at a later point, since I am toying with the idea of making the videos shorter and having a shorter production schedule for them. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I look forward to making the next one.